What's up, guys? It's Toad. Back with you yet again. As usual, I'm obviously in a daze. Still feeling a bit like crap here. Yesterday, 5-1, all in college basketball. My enemy this year, college basketball. One day kind of cuts that college basketball deficit on the season basically in half with 5-1 day with 3 outright underdog wins. I mean, obviously, I'll take that any day. I mean, that was awesome. Ohio State outright win. Iowa State wins easy. So started out 2-0. Texas got a little dicey, but they got there. Finishing strong. Arizona State, another outright underdog win. The only loss was Iowa. I don't know what happened in that game, man. I mean, thought it was a really bad spot for Minnesota. Nice spot for Iowa to show up. Nope. Iowa blows it. And then Wyoming to finish it off with another outright win as an underdog. And that, they almost blew the outright win. They're winning by 10 in the final minute of the game, and they almost blew the whole thing. They gave up an 8-0 UNLV run. I mean, I had the game on here while I was handicapping tonight's slate, and I was like, oh my God. Like, the game was over. And then I'm like, what the hell just happened? I don't even know what happened because UNLV was going to have to start intentionally fouling. Wyoming was still in the 1-1, and they're not a very good free throw shooting team. I don't know if maybe they missed one of those free throws or something. I don't know what happened. I know that it got back to within 8, and then it went down from 8-2 really fast as well. Or maybe it went down from 6-2 in like one swoop, basically, in like a few seconds. It was still a 6-point game, I think, with like, I don't know, like maybe 10 seconds left. And UNLV did have the ball back at that point. They scored. Wyoming inbounded. UNLV, of course, has to intentionally foul. But before they do that, UNLV turns it over right back. Wyoming turns it over. UNLV gets it. They score again. All of a sudden, it's a 2-point game. Unbelievable. And then it was still actually not over because then UNLV intentionally fouled them again. 1-1 still, and Wyoming misses the first free throw again. So they still can't put it away. And then luckily UNLV missed a shot, and then the game kind of ended there. Not enough time left. So, I mean, I don't think the cover was in danger, but man, that was really insane. It might have been in danger if it went into overtime. But as I said, that was going to be a low-scoring, ugly game, and it was. So very conducive to the underdog covering in that one. All right. Let's look at today's card here. College basketball. I have 2 plays today. They are both in college basketball. Let's look at it, man. I don't think there's a whole lot that I even really want to go through. I mean, Houston, I'll do some quick hitters here. Houston, I think they could be in a bounce-back spot because they almost lost to UCF as a pretty big favorite. So they may show up here, but they do have Kansas up next, so could also be a look ahead as far as Houston is concerned. So I could see that game going either way. They're a massive favorite against Utah. I mean, Houston's still, I think, flying under the radar because they play kind of ugly and they haven't looked as dominant as they have the last few years. Utah having to come into Houston from out of elevation, and they were just in Texas a couple games prior. So Utah kind of traveling all over the place, although Houston's traveling back from Florida as well. Florida is at South Carolina. I mean, this is going to be a big line as well. Houston's like a 19-point favorite, by the way. Florida just beat Texas easy. They're going on the road to face South Carolina. I mean, the only thing you can really say about this is that Florida likes to play a real fast tempo, and South Carolina does the opposite. So South Carolina is going to try to decrease the tempo and slow the game way down and get it out of Florida's preferred pace. So I think that's what you're looking at here. So it's the tempo collision. Which team will be able to control the tempo more? Sometimes the lesser team at home is able to do that if they're able to slow the game down, which is what South Carolina does want to do. Do I want to bank on it? No, I don't. Florida does have Georgia up next, which is kind of a bigger game as well. South Carolina still hasn't won in SEC play, and they've had a couple of close calls. coming off a blowout road loss to Oklahoma, which is a much uglier loss. So they could be in a bounce back spot. Florida laying 10.5 in that one. Kansas, I first looked at this and I'm like, Kansas is in a sandwich spot, man, because they just beat Kansas State. And that was coming off of that Iowa State loss. So you think that might be the type of loss that hangs you over because it's that really hyped matchup. Like, this is this huge Big 12 matchup, very, very hyped. And Kansas doesn't do well in that game. A lot of times that can hang you over, but they're the much better team over Kansas State. It is a rivalry. They were able to get the win. Now they have to go on the road to TCU, and they got Houston up next, which is going to be a look ahead. Houston, again, still one of the best teams in this conference. They're actually the only undefeated team in the conference at this point. So it does look like a sandwich spot to me for Kansas, but TCU is coming off upsetting Baylor on the road, which is a huge win for TCU. That's Fort Worth versus Waco there, kind of an in-state rivalry there to some extent. Big win for TCU, beating a team they consider to be a bigger brother to them in the state of Texas. Double-digit upset for TCU there, so I can't play either side in this one either. Kansas is only a 6.5-point favorite, although it's gone up a little bit. So not laying a ton of points, so it looks almost a little bit easy to lay the points with Kansas in that one. I will say that. Let's see. The first one up, or the next one up is the first play that I have. Let me enter it in real quick here, which is St. John's minus 7.5. The Johnnies. I'm going to fade Xavier in this spot, even though I know this is another big game for Xavier. But how many big games and huge efforts can you sustain in a row? I don't know. St. John's is actually down from 8 to 7.5 with juice. Not a huge move on that one there. Don't see the percentages yet. St. John's ranked 20th in the country. I think probably that's actually about accurate. I think that's about where Ken Baum has them. Xavier's coming off upsetting Marquette, man. I mean, that's like their win of the year. And they had played Marquette to within 2 at home the other time they played them. This time, they beat them on the road. Huge win for Xavier. And yeah, I know Xavier is also flying under the radar a bit. Both of these teams actually are better than people think they are. Although St. John's is starting to kind of get that recognition. Xavier, maybe not really, but Xavier, they pulled off that huge win over Marquette. And the way they were able to do that is kind of somehow getting that into an uglier game. I mean, Marquette likes to speed up the game, and that was an uglier game. Xavier plays kind of more of a mid-tempo style of game, so they're not really the slowest. But it looks like they tried to slow that game down and ugly it up against Marquette to try to stay in the game. And they did it successfully, and they won. And they were coming off a physical game against Villanova the game before that they won as well. So 2 huge wins. Now, second straight road game. And not only that, but they're going from Milwaukee all the way out to the New York area. So kind of a tough travel spot, having to go to the East Coast. And then they do have UConn back at home after that, which that may even be a look ahead because UConn has been the dominant force for a couple of years in this conference. They won the championship the last 2 years. So it is actually possible Xavier overlooks St. John's just because it's surrounded by games that actually happen to be bigger than the St. John's game. As weird as that sounds, because St. John's is up near the top of the conference, basically tied with Marquette. And then again, Xavier coming off that huge win over Marquette. I mean, I think they could be in a big letdown spot. It was a 9.5-point upset here. I mean, Xavier was blowing them out of the building, and then Marquette made a game of it late. Both teams shot pretty poorly in this game. It was a weird game. Xavier coming off of that, I just don't like it. And St. John's is going to really try to speed it up. They go even faster than Marquette tries to, and I don't know that Xavier is going to be able to be up for trying to slow that down 2 games in a row either. As again, Xavier plays more of like a mid-tempo style game. We can see it here. St. John's kept up, actually has them exactly 20th in the country, 5th in defense. 310th in luck, so yes, St. John's very unlucky, and 54th in tempo, pretty fast, 72nd in strength of schedule. Xavier down here at 47th, he has them at 124th in tempo, so not slow, but St. John's significantly faster than that. Still pretty good defensively, 40th, but again, St. John's, he has St. John's better, actually on both sides of the ball over Xavier. He does have Xavier also unlucky at 280th, but St. John's even less lucky. And then Xavier a little bit stronger strength of schedule at 40. Not a whole lot to take away from that, I don't think. And I think he has St. John's winning this game by about 8, if I remember correctly. I don't know. I can go look. But that's something you do have to pay to get from KenPom there. But I like it. I'm going to lay the points to St. John's. I think really it just comes down to Xavier's in a pretty big letdown spot there. So I'll lay the points to St. John's in that one. Oh, yeah, and then on the other side, I mean, St. John's, I mean, I think they're in a spot where they should be focused. They're coming off a win over Seton Hall. I mean, that doesn't matter. They haven't had difficult games around surrounding this game against Xavier here. They did win at Xavier, so maybe that's the one thing that you could say is that Xavier is in the road revenge second meeting angle here. So that's one issue with it, but I don't think that's enough to keep me off of it. I think it is a letdown spot. And again, St. John's has this game surrounded by a couple of easier games on each side of this, so I think they will be focused for that one. All right. Looking for other games that are even like games that I would even consider to be big or like discussion worthy. I don't even know. I mean, Indiana and Northwestern is a Big Ten game at least. Indiana, they are coming off that upset where I played them on the road at Ohio State, and Ohio State just beat Purdue, and I won on both of those games. Nailing it, baby. Trying to figure out the Jekyll and Hyde Ohio State team. Ohio State. Indiana, I mean, they're tough to figure out as well, but I think just in general, they're not as good as people think they are, and they're coming off that nice upset of Ohio State. Second straight road game. I don't love the spot. Them going to Northwestern. Northwestern, I believe, plays a different tempo than they do as well. Indiana likes to go fast. Northwestern, I'm pretty sure, plays pretty slow. Yeah, they do. So pretty big pacing contrast there. So it could be another issue for Indiana having to go into Northwestern. Northwestern's record looks worse than Indiana's, but Northwestern, I believe KenPom actually has them as the better team, even though the record is worse. So also misleading number here as far as the records are concerned. People are going to look at this and think, well, wait a minute. Indiana just beat Ohio State on the road, and you're giving me 5.5 points with them against this Northwestern team that doesn't have a good record? Like, what gives? So it looks very suspicious as well. Northwestern, though, I don't think I can quite do it because they just played Michigan really tough. They took Michigan to the wire, took them into overtime on the road. So, excuse me, I don't think I can play Northwestern either. So I just have to stay away. Northwestern is up from 4.5 to 5.5. Both teams in bad spots. I mean, that game for Northwestern against Michigan seems like it might even be worse to try to bounce back from than Indiana's upset of Ohio State. So, I don't know. But difficult read. But again, it does look like the market is telling you what you should think there, with the line being completely different than what you would think it would be based on the team's records. So the records are misleading. The line is telling you Northwestern is indeed the better team. And if Northwestern is able to ugly up that game on Indiana, it could be a long day for Indiana, and they could start getting pretty frustrated. East Tennessee State, don't like the spot that they're in. They beat Samford on the road. They played Furman really close on the road, and then they upset Samford on the road. 5.5 point upset. The game right after that. So they played the top two teams in the conference, basically, and played them both really tough. And now they're coming off that, and they get Western Carolina. And then they get the other top two teams in the conference, Chattanooga, UNC Greensboro, and then Furman again after this. So this is definitely a sandwich spot. The problem is Western Carolina is such a bad team that I just don't think I can come in and put my money on them. They are trying to bounce back from an almost 30-point loss at home to UNC Greensboro, so maybe they'll show with us. They'll come up. Maybe they'll show up with some what's the word I'm looking for? Competitive spirit here in this game. I don't know, but I don't want to bank on it. East Tennessee's down from 16 to 15, though, so it is definitely a mismatch, as the odds makers are telling you. But I don't want to put my money on it, like I said. LaSalle and St. Louis. I mean, this game, LaSalle is coming off losing pretty bad to UMass. They'd won two pretty big games in a row against St. Bonaventure and Davidson, with a huge comeback against Davidson. Now they have to go out on the road to face St. Louis after that ugly loss to UMass. It is a second straight road game for them, though. But St. Louis, I mean, they beat Richmond. Now they get LaSalle, but they do have George Washington, VCU, and Dayton all up next. So it is possible St. Louis may overlook this spot. But, I mean, obviously, again, not a game I'm going to play. St. Louis is up from 9 to 10. I don't really know if I would want to have my money on LaSalle. I'm just pointing out some of the situations here. And then Loyola Chicago, they just lost close to Dayton after beating Rhode Island. So they played a couple of tough games as well in a row. Dayton playing them to within 2 as a 10.5-point dog. Pretty big game. A couple of big games in a row for Loyola Chicago. And they got George Mason up after this as well. So that's a big game as well. And they got Fordham in the mix there in between the two. Possible that Loyola doesn't have their full focus against Fordham. Fordham, it's going to be hard to gauge what they're going to be like in this game, man, because Fordham's still coming off that triple overtime game against UMass with all the fouls. It was just absolutely insane. UMass has played once since then, and they actually did win. Fordham has had at least a lot of rest since then because they haven't played since then. But also their coach self-imposed like a 4-game ban for spending too much money on entertainment purposes, which I heard was not strippers. I heard it was chicken. So take from that what you will. It's ridiculous. So I don't know how Fordham is going to respond to all that. Coming off that triple OT game, now having an interim coach, I assume, like an assistant taking over. I have no idea what they're going to be like. So your guess is as good as mine. Loyola Chicago up from 9 to 9.5 with juice. So some money looks like it has come in on their side. Obviously, not a game I'm going to want to touch. What else we got? Texas A&M and Ole Miss is the one ranked matchup today, I guess, between two ranked teams, number 13 at number 16. Should be a good one. I don't have a strong opinion on this one. Although Texas A&M bounced back from a couple of losses there by beating LSU, so they may have a little bit of momentum they're carrying out on the road here to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is coming off their big rivalry game against Mississippi State where they were losing. I had Mississippi State in that game. Ole Miss came back, made a game of it, and were able to get within the number and beat me. So Mississippi State did not cover for me. Unfortunately, Ole Miss played them pretty tough. So Ole Miss coming off a couple of huge games in a row, Alabama and then Mississippi State. I mean, that was the reason why I faded them, was because they were coming off that win over Alabama, which is just massive. So they're coming off a couple of big games that probably mean more to them than this A&M game. A&M's schedule has been a little bit cleaner coming into this game. So I think A&M probably comes into this with the better rest scenario here. So that might be the way I would look. But Ole Miss is up from 2 to 3.5 now. So the market read is kind of telling you otherwise on this one. Difficult read, man. Very difficult read here. Texas A&M, let me see. Where are they at? Oh, I just saw them. They are Ken Palm's 17th ranked in the country, 223rd in tempo, 11th in the country in defense. And he's got Ole Miss right behind them at 18th, 12th in defense. That is wild. He has these two teams very similar, actually very similar all across the board. Similar offense, defense, strength of schedule, tempo. Everything is similar. That's crazy. And luck index, yeah, a little bit higher on the Texas A&M side, but I don't think that's a big deal. So Ken Palm actually has Texas A&M as a slightly better team, which I guess the odds are telling you that, is Ole Miss probably should get about 3.5 maybe for home court, which they're not quite getting here. So take from all that what you will, man. It's a difficult read. Two similar teams coming into this, and I think probably I would say I would give the edge to A&M, like I said, because I think they're a little bit more rested coming into this. Kansas State at Baylor. I lean to Baylor in this one. Kansas State, I mean, they had that big emotional get-up game against Kansas, and they didn't do particularly well, but they didn't go away in the game either. So they basically, I would say, put in a full effort there in a rivalry game at Allen Fieldhouse. Pretty big game for Kansas State there. Now it's a second straight road game. They got to go down to Waco, and then they do have West Virginia back at home after this. And Baylor is coming off kind of an embarrassing upset loss to TCU. So I think Baylor is in a nice bounce back spot here with nothing else really surrounding it. So that's the way I would lean in this one. They're down from 12.5 to 12, though. So some money looks like it's coming against them. Take from that what you will. What else? USC is having to go into kind of a weird environment into Nebraska. USC didn't wind up having a very good game against Wisconsin. I lost on USC in that one. Thought it was a bad spot for Wisconsin traveling to the Pacific Coast. USC now has to go to Lincoln, Nebraska, which they're not used to doing. And they do have a big rivalry game against UCLA up next, and then Michigan State up after that. So maybe some look ahead potential here, maybe not the greatest spot for them. And Nebraska been playing awful. They got to somehow bounce back, man. And they just went on the road to Maryland. Not an easy place to win. They did play pretty tough in that game, though, and still lost, but not an embarrassing performance out of them at the very least. But they're still looking for a win, so I don't know. And will they look ahead to Wisconsin, Illinois, Oregon? I have no idea. So tough read on this one as well. Nebraska down from 6.5 to 6. Looks like 6.5 even money to 6, so a slight move downward there, but not a whole lot to actually really see there. And then my other play is going to be on this next game up here, which is going to be on, what's the line that I got? I got to make sure that I know what number I got here. Oh, wait, did I play this yet? I actually got to look. I don't even know. I think the number is the same as it was last night, though. And this play, I know what you're going to think. You're going to hate this one. This is on Arkansas, -1.5. I'm going to do it. They're down from 2 to 1.5. I'm going to fade Georgia in this one. Georgia, I think the spot sets up to fade them. They just played, I know they played Tennessee on the road. Look at how many ranked teams they played in a row, by the way. Ole Miss, Kentucky, OU, Oklahoma. They won those 2 games there. Tennessee lost, and then they played Auburn. Pretty tough, man. I was on Georgia in that one, and Georgia was getting kind of blasted early on. They were getting blown out of their own arena. They came back, showed a lot of guts, man. They came back, fell behind by a decent margin again, came back again, covered for me, and yeah, they didn't backdoor it, but they made it look a little bit closer than it really was at the end. It was really down to like 4 or 5 at the end, and they cut it to 2, I think, on a final shot of the buzzer that didn't matter at the end of it, but still. They played Auburn to within 2, and the game was pretty close in the end there. It was within 1 or 2 possessions in the final minute there. So Georgia put in a full effort there playing against Auburn. Now they go on the road again to face Arkansas, and they got Florida up, which is Georgia-Florida is always a rivalry, man, and Florida's number 5 in the country. That could be a look-ahead spot. That's a big game for them, man. So they could overlook this Arkansas team. It's been struggling mightily. And then if you look at what Georgia's done on the road, it's not great. They've been significantly better at home, which, I mean, again, that's the case for a lot of college basketball teams. But they did win at Georgia Tech early in the season, but then their only other 2 true road games were double-digit losses at Ole Miss and at Tennessee. And I know those are good teams. Georgia's also a good team. Arkansas is not as good as those 2 teams. That's fair. I think they're better than Georgia Tech. And Arkansas, I think they're flying under the radar. So I think it's a bad spot for Georgia. I think it's at the very least a hangover spot. I think it is a sandwich spot, though. Arkansas just lost by almost 20 at Missouri. I mean, they have not been playing well to start conference play, but they did have to face Tennessee on the road, Ole Miss, Florida. Don't really expect them to win those games, and they didn't play badly against Ole Miss and Florida. I mean, those are pretty close games. They had a close loss at LSU coming off those 2 games. I mean, maybe just hung over a little bit coming off some big performances there, some big opponents that they had there, and then they lost bad to Missouri. Missouri's not that bad a team, even though I know I faded them last night and I won with Texas. But Arkansas, I think this has got to be a bounce-back spot now that they're back at home. They lost their last couple games at home. They're 0-5 in conference right now. I think they're going to have a lot of motivation here to try to get this game, and they're favored. So you're getting a team that basically was ranked until their last game, Georgia, up against a team that's been unranked for a while, and Arkansas. And the team that's been unranked for a while is the favorite. Even though, of course, the odds makers are not telling you that Arkansas is the better team. They're not, but they're telling you it's closer than what you might think it is. And everybody's just been shitting on Arkansas, man. Like, the narrative at this point is that John Calipari is too much of an old-school coach. His style doesn't translate anymore. It's like, wasn't he just in the tournament again last year with Kentucky? And, yeah, they got upset in the first round, and it's been happening. You know, they've lost some games they shouldn't have lost in the tournament. But really? Is that what you're telling me? I don't think it makes sense. I think what's more likely going on here is he's a coach in a new program, man. So he's having to deal with players that he didn't recruit himself in a lot of cases. So he's got to figure out like what these players can do and how to best use them. Then on the other side, the players have to get used to having a new coach, have to get used to his system. So he might have brought some of his guys over, but still, there's definitely like growing pains there when you get a new coach in there, man, and a new system. So you can't expect it to work right away. So do I think he's the greatest coach anymore? No. But do I think he's a terrible coach? No. I still think he's a competitive good coach. And I don't even really like John Calipari. We know his track record. He had a bunch of his wins up here at UMass vacated due to recruiting violations and stuff. It's John Calipari. But he's a coach with a winning pedigree. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he just completely falls off a cliff for no reason, especially when going to a new team. And he's going to a new team that has less talent than what he was dealing with at Kentucky as well. So, it's the nature of it. When you get fired, you got to find a new job. That's the way that it is. I know Arkansas did a little bit better under Musselman than they looked this year. But again, transition period, different coach. We'll see how it goes. But I really think they want to get this win, man. So I'm going to play Arkansas in this one. I'm going to fade this sentiment. When you reach a point where the narrative is something like that, where it's like John Calipari's done, like he should never coach again, it's getting a little bit too far. Let's say I think Arkansas is going to get a win somewhere here, and I think it may be in this game here. So let's do it. Arkansas will be the play in that one. Nate, what's up, man? Thanks for hanging out. Cosenza, not Costanza. Neither of those is correct, but Costanza, I do look like him. Can't stand ya. All right. And then Miami is going to Stanford. This is a really weird one where both teams are having to travel from the East Coast to the Pacific Coast. But again, Miami is going to be in an unfamiliar environment because they don't usually have to travel to Stanford, California here. So, or wherever. Where are they actually at in California? I forget. Is it Palo Alto? I don't even remember. Whatever it is. Somewhere in the Bay Area there. No, it is Stanford, California. Oh, I just made it up and I was actually right. All right. I don't know. I don't know where some of the actual California towns are, even though I've been to San Francisco and LA and Anaheim, so I don't know. All right. Stanford, they just beat UNC on the road, man, and that was a double-digit upset against basically a perennial basketball powerhouse in North Carolina there. So that's crazy. Crazy win for Stanford. I don't know how that happened in North Carolina. So now Stanford could be in a pretty major letdown spot coming off of that, but Miami is so bad, and they're having to travel to a place they never go to and a time zone they never go to. I don't want to have to deal with any of that. Miami is probably really embarrassed, giving up 117 points in their last game to SMU and losing by 43. That's just insane. This Miami team, oh, boy. Boy, they're bad this year. But, yeah, I don't know. I just figured I'd point out that game quickly, but Stanford's up from 9-10 in that one. That's how bad Miami is now, unfortunately for them. NHL, we got small slate here. My Boston Bruins are a big underdog at the New Jersey Devils. I don't expect the Bruins to win that game. Let's just put it that way. I think both teams have reason to show up and play in that one, to show up focused, and the Devils are obviously the better team and at home, so they're way up from minus 165 to minus 192. So good luck to my Boston Bruins. Toronto is coming off beating Tampa, so that was a pretty nice win for them. Maybe a little bit of a letdown type of situation here coming into this game against Columbus. Line has moved down a little bit from minus 235 to minus 230 on Toronto. So maybe some money grabbing Columbus. I don't want to do it. And then the other two games are actually pretty nice big games here. Winnipeg, Colorado, probably the game of the night. Big game, big Western Conference matchup. Colorado down from minus 140 to minus 130 in this one. Line has moved against Colorado a little bit. I agree with that move. I lean to Winnipeg in this one slightly. Winnipeg, they've lost 2 games in a row, man, and not good either. These were not games that they really should have lost. They lost their last home game to Calgary. Calgary at least does have good goaltending, though, and Winnipeg did not have Hellebuck in net in that one. It was Comrie in net there, Comrie. So they had won every Hellebuck game between the two Comrie starts, and they lost both of those ones. So they lost with their backup goaltender in there. Then they had Hellebuck back in net for their first game of this road trip going into Utah, and they lost that game too, and that is an ugly loss. And now they're playing Colorado, coming off that real ugly loss there. And Calgary, as I was saying, they do have good goaltending on Calgary at the very least. Utah, kind of an inexplicable loss there for Winnipeg. They're probably looking ahead to this Colorado game. Colorado did also beat Winnipeg here in this venue back on December 31st on New Year's Eve, 5-2. So maybe a little bit of revenge for Winnipeg, a little bit of quick revenge returning to the scene of the crime here. Looks like a bounce back spot to me for Winnipeg. Should be Hellebuck in net again here. He only played 1 game since his break that he had, so he should be ready to go again with 1 day off here. Colorado, on the other hand, I mean, they just played a few much bigger games in a row. I know they're coming off a loss as well, and they're not traveling, but they beat the Rangers in overtime. Well, this is since they've come back from break, so actually, Colorado lost to Winnipeg most recently. What am I saying? So Colorado beat Winnipeg at home. Then they actually lost to Winnipeg on the 11th to finish their road trip. So what am I saying? So maybe it's actually quick revenge for Colorado because Winnipeg did get their revenge. Excuse me for that. But I don't know if the revenge is going to be a huge factor here when both teams really just want to beat each other. So Colorado, they finished the road trip playing Winnipeg, came back home, won in overtime against the Rangers. Lost in that brutal loss when they were up 3-0 to Edmonton and lost the game. Then beat Dallas, pretty big win there. And then they lost to Minnesota, which I mentioned I liked Minnesota in that one. I thought it was a sandwich spot for Colorado. So maybe they will be in a bounce back spot here. But I kind of like how this sets up for Winnipeg a little bit more in this one with fewer tough matchups leading up into this game. So slight lean on that one. And then Florida at the LA Kings in this one. Florida has been out on the Pacific Coast for a game already. They beat Anaheim for a second straight game. Beating them pretty easily both games. I mean, Anaheim's not very good. Florida now on a back-to-back, having to go up the street basically from Anaheim to LA. So not a lot of travel, but they did play yesterday. They did use Bobrovsky yesterday. So does that mean they're not going to use him in tonight's game? I actually don't know. They may not, because it is a back-to-back, but it seems kind of strange that they would want to use Bobrovsky against the easier team to beat, but who knows? I guess, well, they didn't want to play two games in a row, I guess, but he would have had multiple days off between the two, so I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know if Bobrovsky is going to actually attempt to play back-to-back games or not. LA Kings coming off an ugly loss in a return home spot to Pittsburgh. So that's a horrendous loss. And now, second game back, you usually play a lot better. When you have that return home spot, as I always say, it's like a distracted spot. You tend to maybe not play well, especially if you have a bigger opponent up next. That was the case for LA. That was a bad spot for LA. So that explains that loss. And when you do return home like that and suffer from the distraction and play a really bad game, it tends to focus you a lot coming into the next game. So I think it will be a focus spot for the Kings coming into this one. So I lean slightly to the Kings in this one, but they're down from -115 to -110. Very difficult to gauge that game. And then NBA, like I said, I don't have any plays in either of these, and there is a pretty big NBA slate here. It's just, I don't know that I can do it. The teams that were involved in both games I played the other day are playing each other now, where Detroit pulled off the upset at Houston and Atlanta lost on the road at the Knicks. Now Detroit's going to Atlanta. Do I think that means that Detroit's in a letdown spot and then Atlanta's in a bounce back spot? I don't know, because Atlanta played a pretty tough game against the Knicks there, so I don't really know. I don't want to bank on that, but Atlanta is a 2.5-point favorite, actually down from 4.5, so the line's actually dropped on the Hawks in this one. So interesting to see. Minnesota, Dallas, but again, this is going to be a Luka-less Dallas team, so not really the same Dallas team. Minnesota's coming off that barn burner on Monday afternoon on the MLK slate, where Minnesota had Memphis completely on the ropes pretty much and wound up blowing the lead and losing the game. Now second straight road game going to this Dallas team. It doesn't have Luka, and they got Denver up next. How will Minnesota respond to that loss? I don't know. It may not be the greatest spot for Minnesota coming into this one. And Dallas coming off an ugly loss at Charlotte, where I mentioned probably wasn't the greatest spot for Dallas because they had just beaten Oklahoma City, which I had played Dallas in that game against Oklahoma City because Oklahoma City was coming off the huge win over Cleveland. So it was a major letdown spot there. And Dallas then suffered from their own letdown off of that and lost at Charlotte ugly. So they may bounce back from this, even though they do have Oklahoma City and Boston up next. So I would slightly lean to Dallas, and the market has moved that way down from 4 to 2. So public's probably going to be, looking at that and maybe playing the T-Wolves, thinking, well, this is the Mavs without Luka. Like, T-Wolves are stacked, So, some thoughts to that effect, I guess. Cleveland at Houston, really good game. The best game on the slate. I don't know what to think about this game either. Cleveland coming off a blowout of Phoenix. Houston coming off that loss to Detroit, though. So Houston kind of in a bounce back spot there. May have been looking ahead to this one. That was part of my handicap, that it was a sandwich spot. for Houston in that because they were returning home from a road trip and they had Cleveland to look ahead to. So they, I believe, overlooked Detroit and got caught. So it is going to be a bounce-back spot for Houston. Cleveland is starting a 2-game road trip, so it's a good spot for them too. They'll be able to carry that momentum out here and be focused on this game. So I think you're going to get two good focused teams in this one. It should be a battle, man. It should be a very good game. Houston, again, should be in a bounce-back spot, like I said, because when you return home and you have a bad game, you tend to bounce back in a big way and be refocused after that. So I would actually slightly lean to Houston in this one, but I'm not going to do it. The line's actually down from 4 to 2.5 here, so the line is moving in that direction, and in some ways it almost looks too easy to take Cleveland, where it's like, oh, like the public's just going to think, oh, you're giving me the better team, and it's basically just pick the winner. Yeah. A lot of times it's not quite that easy, folks. And then you got Memphis off that big barn burner comeback win against Minnesota that I just mentioned on the MLK slate there. Morant did play in that game, by the way. He was a game-time decision. He played. Gobert also did play for Minnesota. And Charlotte coming up that upset of Dallas. So both teams kind of in a bad spot in that one. Memphis is a huge favorite, though. Excuse me. Up from 10.5 to 12.5, or 12, excuse me. But definitely not a spot where I'm going to want to play Memphis. And then Golden State coming up that 40-point loss to Boston, going on the road to face Sacramento. Maybe could be in a bounce-back spot after that, unless you're going to think that loss will like send them crashing down to earth. I don't know. Sacramento, of course, playing a lot better under Doug Christie, their new coach there. Since he's taken over, they only have one loss. They've been a completely different team almost, and they're just kind of rolling right now. They've had a couple of days off, though, so maybe that rest isn't a great thing, but I don't know. They're not traveling. I mean, that win against Houston was big, but that win against Washington wasn't big, and that's what they're coming off of, so they may still be focused against Golden State here. Kings are up from 6.5 to 7 in that one. They are indeed the better team, and then Golden State just not really playing well. Again, a bit too old at this point, I think. And then my Boston Celtics coming off that 40-point dismantling of Golden State. I think that could put them in a little bit of a letdown spot. It's still Golden State. It's still Steph Curry. Probably not the greatest spot for the Celtics to be in here. Now going to the LA Clippers. Clippers, inconsistent team, man. Very tough to gauge what you're going to get out of them. But they're coming off that loss to the Bulls in that game that was rescheduled for some reason. I don't know. So they are now playing a third game in 4 days, but it is all at home. That game against the Bulls was off of that big win over the Lakers, and they had the Celtics game up next. So I thought it was a sandwich spot, and they got caught. Chicago blew them out. So now the Clippers are off that embarrassing loss, so probably in a bit of bounce-back mode. So I would not want to be touching the Celtics in this one. They are up from 5.5 to 10, and I think that's because Kawhi Leonard is probably, I think he is out in this game. But even that being said, that's factored into the line now, obviously. That's why the line has moved like this. So that being said, I don't want to take the Clippers in this one. I just don't want to try to lay that many points with the Celtics in a spot like that. So that's going to do it for me, man. A little bit of a more efficient show this morning. Nate, thanks for hanging out, man. My 2 plays today being selective. I've played nothing but college basketball the last 2 days now, once we get to tonight, and hopefully it's going to be better than most of the season has been. Last night was excellent, though, so hopefully it continues. We got St. John's -7.5 and Arkansas -1.5. Those are the plays. That's going to do it for me. Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Tower Gang Podcast, patreon.com/Tower Gang, and you get bonus content, baby. If you subscribe to us, give us some support. You get live pre-show, post-show, and you can have those tonight when we have a new Tower Gang at 9:11 p.m. Eastern tonight. The most offensive podcast ever to exist, man. Hilarious podcast. You're going to want to show up. You're not going to want to miss that, so do it. It's always a good time to subscribe to the Patreon as well. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one, and peace.